In this session, we learn about the formation of rectus sheath as well as the contents of it, especially the rectus abdominis muscle. Regarding the formation of rectus sheath, if we consider the mode of formation, it is mainly formed by the splitting of the aponeurosis of internal oblique muscle. Other than this, the aponeurosis of the external oblique as well as transversus abdominis also takes part in the formation of rectus sheath. Let us see how it is being formed and is it similar in different level or not. First, what is rectus sheath? It is an aponeurotic envelope for the rectus abdominis muscle on each side of linea alba. So, what is rectus sheath? It is an aponeurotic envelope. Why this is known as aponeurotic envelope? Because the muscle which is enveloped by the aponeurosis. If we take a cross section through the anterior abdominal wall, suppose this is one-sided rectus abdominis and this is another sided rectus abdominis muscle, and the rectus sheath will be like this. So, this is the linea alba on cross section, and these two are the anterior and posterior layers of the rectus sheath. So, rectus sheath, this is an aponeurotic envelope for the rectus abdominis muscle on each side of linea alba. Now, formation of rectus sheath. Before going into detail of the formation of rectus sheath, let us describe one thing. Suppose this is the xiphis sternum. This is the right and left costal margins, mid axillary line on both sides, anterior superior iliac spine, and this portion is the symphysis pubis. And this is the position for the umbilicus, and this one is the linea alba. This one is the linea alba. Clear? Now, the rectus, before going into detail of the rectus sheath formation, first let us describe the rectus abdominis muscle. Rectus abdominis muscle, it is a long strap muscle which is wider in the upper part and narrower in the lower part. For descriptive purpose, we have to describe this muscle into under four headings: origin, insertion, nerve supply, action. First, origin. The rectus abdominis muscle is being originated from the lower part by two heads. One is medial head, another one is lateral head. The medial head arises from the anterior surface of symphysis pubis like this. Suppose this is the medial head which is taking origin from the anterior surface of the symphysis pubis, and the lateral head will arise from the lateral part of the pubic crest as well as pubic tubercle. So, this is like this. So, it has got two heads, one is medial head, another one is lateral head. Now, both of these heads join with each other and will go upward like this. So, this is the muscle which is going upward, and being a strap muscle, the fibers are parallel with each other. This is like this. Now, where it is being inserted? Before going into detail of insertion, let us see one thing. This is the 7th costal cartilage. This will be the 6th. This is the 5th costal cartilage, right? And in the upper part, this rectus abdominis will be inserted by 4 fleshy slips. 2. The medial most one will go to the xiphisternum like this. Then from lateral to medial, if we consider, they will get inserted like this. Okay. So, from lateral to medial, the lateral 3 fibers are inserted into the anterior surface of the costal cartilages of 5, 6 and 7th, right. So, origin by medial and the lateral head and insertion by 4 fleshy fibers. And as we can see here, in the lower part it is narrower, in the upper part it is broader. Nerve supply, this muscle is getting supplied by the lower 5 intercostal nerves and the subcostal nerve. That means the lower 6 thoracic nerves. Action, it gives protection, it helps a little bit in retention of the abdominal viscera, also helps in compression of it and produces the flexion of vertebral column, just like the function of anterior abdominal wall muscles. Now, we will start the formation of rectus sheath, the mode of formation. For descriptive purpose, the mode of formation has been divided into 3 parts. The level above the costal cartilage, that means above this level. So, rectus sheath formation above the costal cartilage. Then from the costal margin to the midway between the umbilicus and the symphysis pubis. Umbilicus, symphysis pubis, midway. That means like this. And the third one, that is from the lower end of the previous extent, that means from this one up to the symphysis pubis. So, the formation of rectus sheath we will describe into 3 parts, that is the upper one, the middle one and the lower one. And line of demarcation, again I repeat, above the costal margin, this one, from the costal margin up to the midway between the umbilicus and the symphysis pubis, and from the last one to the symphysis pubis. So, we will describe it in 3 parts. Now, we can make a chart like this. তোমাদের বুঝতে সুবিধে হবে. First, let us do one diagram here. Then anterior rectus sheath and then posterior rectus sheath. Suppose this is the rectus abdominis muscle in the upper part. This is one-sided rectus abdominis muscle, of which this is the lateral and this one is the medial side, right. And I am describing it above the level of the costal margin. What happens here? Let us see. Suppose for this purpose, this one is the anterior, posterior, lateral and medial like this, and the posterior wall of the rectus sheath is deficient here, and the muscle directly lies over the 5, 6 and 7 costal cartilages. These 3 are 5, 6 and 7 costal cartilages. Here the posterior wall is deficient, but what about the anterior wall of the rectus sheath? The anterior wall is thin here, and this is formed solely by the aponeurosis of the external oblique muscle. So, suppose this is the external oblique muscle and this is the aponeurosis. This is going like this, and this is the portion which is the linea alba. So, anterior wall is at this level, the anterior wall is formed by the external oblique aponeurosis only, and this is a very thin one, and the posterior, so this is external oblique only and posterior wall is deficient. Clear? Next, the second level, that is from the costal margin to the midway between the umbilicus and the symphysis pubis. What happens in that? Let us see. Let us do another diagram. This is at the level. Suppose again, this is the rectus abdominis muscle. Again for this, this is anterior, posterior, lateral and medial, right? Now, the three layers are like this. Suppose this one is the external oblique and this one is the internal oblique and this one is the transversus abdominis. Clear? So, the external oblique, it solely forms the anterior layer of the rectus sheath and this is the linea alba. What about the internal oblique? The internal oblique aponeurosis on the lateral end of the lateral side of the rectus abdominis muscle, it will divide into the anterior layer and the posterior layer. The anterior layer will form the anterior wall of the rectus sheath along with the aponeurosis of the external oblique, and the posterior layer will form the posterior layer of the rectus sheath along with the aponeurosis of the transversus abdominis muscle. So, the anterior in the second stage, that is from the costal margin to the midway between the umbilicus and the symphysis pubis, the anterior wall is formed by both external oblique plus internal oblique anterior lamella. And what about the posterior wall? It is formed by the internal oblique, that's posterior lamella plus transversus abdominis muscle. Clear? Next, the third one, that is below the level of the midway between the umbilicus and the symphysis pubis up to the symphysis pubis. What happens? Let us see. Again, this one is the rectus abdominis muscle. Anterior, posterior, lateral and medial, just like others. And here this is the external oblique, internal oblique and transversus abdominis. What happens at this level? All these three will form the anterior layer like this. So, the anterior layer or the anterior wall of the rectus sheath is thickest at this level and the posterior wall is completely deficient here, and this is formed by fascia transversalis and this is formed by fascia transversalis. Clear? So, in this chart again the anterior wall is formed by external oblique, internal oblique and transversus abdominis aponeurosis, whereas the posterior wall is completely deficient and this is formed by fascia transversalis. Clear? So, this is the mode of formation of rectus sheath. Next thing you must know, that is what are the contents of rectus sheath. Okay, before going into the contents, let us describe one thing, what is linea alba. From the very beginning, I am repeatedly telling you what is linea alba and linea alba. Then what is that? This is a median raphe. But do you know what is raphe? The raphe is the raphe is the line of intersection of multiple fibers like this. Multiple fibers যখন আরেকটা একটার সঙ্গে intersect করে, then the line which is produced, suppose এই যে জায়গাটা হবে, this is known as raphe. This is known as raphe. এই যে পেনটা আমি ধরেছি যেখানে interlacement হচ্ছে, this is raphe. So what is linea alba? Now this is the median raphe which is formed by the interlacement of the aponeurotic fibers of all the three flat muscles of abdomen. So all the three muscles of abdomen, they interlace with, the aponeurosis of the three muscles of abdomen, they interlace with each other along the midline, and it starts from the xiphisternum to the symphysis pubis. Okay, so this is known as linea alba. Please note it. Again, I am repeating. Please note it. What is linea alba? This is the median raphe which is formed by the interlacement of the aponeurotic fibers of the three flat muscles of the abdomen. Clear? And this is making the medial margin of the rectus sheath along this line, right? And what about the lateral one? This is known as linea semilunaris. Semilunar shaped and linear. So this is known as linea semilunaris, which is a curved fibrous line and extends from the pubic tubercle to the tip of the ninth costal cartilage. Now, contents of rectus sheath. If we consider, just a minute, we consider this is the formation I have already done. Next hoche contents. Then number 1, muscles. If we consider muscles, then what are the muscles present? Number 1, this is the rectus abdominis muscle, and number 2, pyramidalis muscle. Number 2, vessels. What are the vessels? Now, inferior epigastric and superior epigastric. And third one, this is nerves. What are the nerves? These are lower 5 intercostal nerves and the subcostal nerves. Clear? So, these are the contents of rectus sheath. Now, let us describe one by one. Rectus abdominis, I have already told you what is its origin, its insertion, its function, nerve supply. But one thing I have left, that is tendinous intersection. What is tendinous intersection? The anterior wall of the rectus sheath is attached with the anterior surface of the rectus abdominis muscle at 3 spaces. What are those? Again, suppose this is xiphi sternum, these two are costal cartilages, mid-axillary line, symphysis pubis, linea alba. Suppose this is the position of the rectus abdominis muscle. So, this is the medial head and the lateral head, and this is the rectus abdominis muscle. Here. So, this rectus abdominis muscle, its anterior sheath of the rectus sheath is intersected at 3 spaces. What are those? At the tip of the xiphoid process, that means over here, at the tip of the xiphoid process. Then number 2, one at the level of the umbilicus. Suppose umbilicus is present here. So, at the level of umbilicus. Third one at middle between these two. Sometimes these 3 are very frequent, and sometimes 4th one may be present, which is below that. So, these are tendinous intersection. Why these are present? They represent intersegmental tissues in between the different myotonic segments of rectus muscle. And what is their function? It divides this long muscular column into a number of shorter segments, and this will provide strength to this muscle. একটা মাসেলকে একটা লম্বা লাঠি সেটাকে ইজিলি ভাঙা যায়, কিন্তু ছোট ছোট যদি লাঠি হয় সেটাকে কিন্তু ভাঙা অনেক কষ্টকর. The same thing happens here. This is a long strap muscle, so it is becoming strengthened by this intersections and divides it into multiple small or shorter segments. Next one, that is pyramidalis, which is present only in 20 to 30% cases. Origin, if present, it is from the symphysis pubis. Insertion is getting attached to the linea alba. The position of this muscle will be like this, a very small triangular pyramidalis type of muscle. This is the pyramidalis. So, insertion apex into the linea alba, midway between the umbilicus and the symphysis pubis. I have done it wrong. This will be this position. So this is the pyramidalis muscle. Nerve supply from the subcostal nerve and action, it helps in tension of linea alba. Now come to the arteries. What are the arteries? Rather the vessels present within this rectus sheath. One is the superior epigastric, another one is the inferior epigastric. By this time, you have completed thorax. So all of you know the superior epigastric artery is the terminal branch of the internal thoracic artery, and being formed within this thorax. This is being formed at the level of the 6th intercostal space, all of you know by this time, and it has to enter into the rectus sheath. So how will you enter? This will enter through a triangular gap of the diaphragm between the sternal origin and the origin from the 7th costal cartilage. মানে এই যে sternum origin আর 7th এইভাবে তো তৈরি হচ্ছে, আর তার মাঝে যে triangular গ্যাপটা তৈরি হচ্ছে, through that gap this artery is entering into the rectus sheath. And inferior epigastric artery, this is a branch of the external iliac artery and it arises just above the inguinal ligament, and it will enter into the sheath just in front of arcuate line. Now what is arcuate line? Regarding formation of the rectus sheath, I have already told you at the level midway between the umbilicus and the xaphisternum, এই লেভেলে তার ঠিক ওপরে কি হয়েছিল না, posterior wall of the rectus sheath was present, but below that posterior wall was deficient. So in that place there will be a sharp ending of the posterior wall. That line is known as arcuate line. So in front of that arcuate line, this inferior epigastric artery will enter into the rectus sheath, and within it, it will make anastomosis with the superior epigastric artery at the level of the umbilicus, within the rectus muscle or behind that. Another thing you students must remember, these are the what are the branches of inferior epigastric artery, though this is not commonly asked in your exam, but you have to know. I am just mentioning the names. Branches of inferior epigastric artery, these are cremasteric branch, pubic branch, muscular branch, cutaneous branch, peritoneal branch and anastomotic branch. So again I am repeating, if you want you can note it down. The branches of inferior epigastric artery, these are cremasteric branch, pubic branch, muscular branch, cutaneous branch, peritoneal branch and anastomotic branch. So this is all about your rectus sheath. So by this time all of you know what is rectus sheath, how the rectus sheath is being formed, what is the mode of formation of rectus sheath, what are the tendinous intersection, what are the function of this tendinous intersection, what are the contents of this rectus sheath, detail of rectus abdominis muscle, a little bit of pyramidalis muscle also, and the vessels present within the rectus sheath, and the final one, this is the nerves. The nerves which are the contents of this rectus sheath, they will enter within the rectus sheath after piercing the posterior wall, mainly the posterior lamella of the internal oblique aponeurosis on the lateral aspect along the linea alba. এই যে এত বড় কথাটা বললাম, কথাটার মানে কি দেখি। Again, this is the rectus abdominis muscle. আচ্ছা, ফার্স্ট এটা বলি anterior, posterior, lateral, medial. Okay, this is a cross section rectus abdominis muscle. আচ্ছা, এখানে কি হচ্ছে না, ধরে নে this is the external oblique, এটা internal oblique, এটা হচ্ছে transversus abdominis. External oblique, this is going like this, এখানে linea alba, internal oblique, তার আবার anterior lamella, and this one is the posterior lamella, transversus abdominis. This is a gross one, right? And all of you know that the layer in between the internal oblique and the transversus abdominis. This is the space for the neurovascular plane. This is the plane of neurovascular region. এবার সেখানে কি হচ্ছে, আইডিয়ালি এটা ইয়েলো দিয়ে করা উচিত, আমার কাছে ইয়েলো নেই, দ্যাটস ওয়াই আমি ব্ল্যাক ইউজ করছি। সো এটা যদি হয় এক্সটার্নাল অবলিক, এটা যদি হয় ইন্টারনাল অবলিক, এটা যদি হয় ট্রান্সভার্সাস অ্যাবডোমিনিস, so the nerve is coming like this and it will pierce on the lateral side of the posterior lamella of the internal oblique aponeurosis and finally will enter into the rectus sheath. So this is the way, and that's why during any operation of the anterior abdominal wall, it is very unwise to do an incision along the linea semilunaris, because this may produce segmental paralysis of the rectus abdominis muscle due to the injury of this thoracic nerves, right? And the last thing you must know about applied anatomy, that in absence of obturator artery, the pubic branch of the inferior epigastric artery becomes enlarged, and this is known as abnormal obturator artery, and it runs on the comes in relation with the neck of the femoral hernia. In your next class, we'll go detail of this femoral hernia, and not only femoral hernia, all other abdominal hernias. In that you will come across it in detail. For the timing, you just remember one thing, that is, in absence of obturator artery, the pubic branch of the inferior epigastric artery becomes enlarged and known as abnormal obturator artery. So this is all about your rectus sheath and rectus sheath formation and etc. Please go through it. Thank you.